Okay, so first of all, we have to talk about some heavy, heavy news that happened this week. So on March 16th, on the Tuesday, a white man shot and killed 8 people. And those 8 people included 6 Asian American women. And this happened at different massage parlors in the Atlanta area. And we need to address it because this is just another example of white supremacy and an anti Asian hate crime that is happening in our country and has been happening and has been increasing in the past year, and especially during the pandemic. So, an organization called Stop AAPI Hate revealed that nearly 3,800 incidents were reported over about a year during the pandemic, and that a disproportionate number of the reports said that the attacks were directed at women. And I mean, we have to call it a hate crime. And it's kind of like when
Mhm.
you think of the rhetoric that, for example, oh my God, I almost said President Donald Trump. That's how scarred I am. But when you think about the past President Donald Trump and kind of the rhetoric he used when talking about the coronavirus, I mean, I just want to say this: white supremacy is nothing new. I mean, this is what our country was built on and built upon.
Yeah.
But I think when you have people in power that allow this rhetoric to be looked at as okay, it kind of normalizes it. And I think it's so important for us and for
Mhm.
everyone to talk about things like this and call it what it is. I know we've seen a lot of
Mhm.
media speculation, or not even media speculation. We see headlines talking about the incident and not including that it was a hate crime. And we see the police there in Atlanta and or in Georgia, and they're not saying it was racially motivated. They were saying, oh, it was just a sexualized crime because he said he was doing it because he was like repenting against his sexualization thoughts that he was having. But that's the
Yeah.
thing, these are intersecting. He specifically went to these places where Asian American people were, and Asian American women specifically. And we need to address that
Yeah.
there's a historical fetishization of Asian women that makes them susceptible
Mhm.
to sexual and physical violence, such as what happened on Tuesday. I want to read this
Mhm.
quote. Catherine Siniza Choi, an ethnic studies professor at the University of California, Berkeley, said this quote that I think we should really kind of discuss and think about. She said, killing Asian American women to eliminate a man's temptation speaks to the history of the objectification of Asian and Asian American women as variations of the Asian temptress, the dragon ladies, and the lotus blossoms, whose value is only in relation to men's fantasies and desires. This is horrifying. Stop fetishizing us.
Asians are just not the Asian culture is not well represented in the media and movies, and actually, yesterday I was at work, we got a presentation about just, like, the climate in this country, specifically about race, which was very interesting, and it was specifically for kids in media, and I think they were saying how a lot of Asian kids feel like they're represented the least as far as, like, they're all grouped together in, like it's like there's so many different ethnicities, right? Like, there's or different cultures, I mean, like, there's you can be from China, you can be from Japan, Thailand, like, there's so many Asian countries, and they're all grouped into one, and it's like, "Oh, it's the same culture," but it's not, and I feel like for a really long time, like, to go on to about the sexualization of Asian women, it's like a long time for a while, Asian women were seen as, like, these very sexualized objects in movies and film and TV shows.
Mhm.
It's like it's kind of like you have these stereotypes, and that was one of the stereotypes because they worked at massage parlors or they did certain things, and it's like, that's not fair, and that feeds
Right.
into this, like, how people get these fetishes, and it's not fair to, 1, group people or group cultures into something, and it's not fair to sexualize certain cultures and like encourage people to fetishize them, and then it's
Mhm.
especially terrible and fucked up to go and attack and shoot at these parlors where Asian women work. And I think the media sometimes, I feel like as somebody who used to work in news, like sometimes I think the media is a little bit hesitant to say it's a hate crime or call things certain things until law enforcement does or says something, or like a politician or something, because they don't want to put their opinion on it. It could come out as like bias, I guess. But I do feel like
Right.
the police in Georgia have really dropped the ball with this. Like I saw a quote from a police officer that was saying like the shooter was having a bad day. I'm sorry, but, like, he wasn't
Mhm.
having a bad day. Call it what it is. It was a hate crime, and it was an act of terrorism, and it's messed up, and he should not have done that, and it's like, if it was any other ethnicity or culture that or another person who did that that was not white, they would not have said it was a bad day.
Totally, and even, that police officer who said that this shooter was this murderer was having a bad day, the same person on his Facebook made racist anti-Asian, jokes about the pandemic on his Facebook, and it's just like, this is why, like, last summer when the Black Lives Matter protests were kind of at its height and after George Floyd was murdered, and we were talking about kind of police brutality and how it's so rampant and how so many people are so distrusting of police. And it's like, this is why. We see it time and time again. And this is the person that's saying this was not a racist crime. This was not a hate crime. And yet he also engages in racist rhetoric. And it's like, of course, of course. Like, how can we
Yeah.
trust law enforcement when stuff like this continually happens and the perception we have of police continues to get what's the word? Like it like it like makes sense. Like it adds up. Like what we think of them
Yeah.
comes true.
And it's just so sad because it's like I feel like I honestly feel like for a really long time, people have put in a lot of work, which they have needed to, and it's very long overdue. But I feel like recently, a lot of people are trying to educate themselves about how to be anti-racist, specifically towards Black people, which I think is very overdue, and everyone needs to do research and put in work to be anti-racist and anti-discriminatory. But I feel like people have really they haven't put in a lot of work on how to be anti-racist against Asian Americans or the Asian culture. And it's also really sad that like this is the first shooting, at least major shooting in a while, I feel like, because of the pandemic, and it's
Mhm.
just so sad that now that the pandemic's getting a little bit better, this group is attacked.
Right.
And you were right, earlier you said how, Trump used to call it the China virus, and, like, he really started putting gas on this fire, and it's like, when you have someone
Mhm.
in power who says that, it empowers people who have similar thinking or people who think similar to him, and that's not fair. That's not right. This isn't their fault, and it's not fair. Like, I have a friend
Mhm.
who the other day was walking down the street in LA, and somebody said something to her behind her back because she was Asian. Like, in LA. Like, how is that okay? Like, this is happening to so many people that we know, and
Right.
it's unacceptable, and it really breaks my heart.
It does. It's beyond frustrating, and you talked about it. I mean, we have to educate ourselves. I think that's the biggest thing. We have to educate ourselves on what hate crime looks like and what how to be anti-racist. And I think it's so important to talk about this. Have these kind
Mhm.
of conversations with your friends, your relatives, the people around you, because we can't
Mhm.
get away with media and other
Mhm.
entities not labeling this what it is as an anti-Asian hate
Yeah,
crime. And so I think it's so
exactly.
important to talk about.